Soundstripe.
Popcorn therapy. Holistic health and wellness through the lens of pop culture. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Popcorn Therapy. I am very excited to have a guest with me today who has been my unofficial popcorn therapy for a long time because we're always texting and sending each other voice notes about usually Love is Blind, among other things. And today we're not going to be talking about Love is Blind. We're going to be talking about Don't Worry, Darling and Wandavision. And I would love, Emilee, for you to introduce yourself just however you'd like to.
Great. Yeah, so happy to be on the pod. First notes to full-blown podcast. It's the evolution of friendship. Yeah, my name is Emilee Nimetz. I use they, them pronouns. I like pop culture and thinking about pop culture.
Well, Emilee is an actor and a writer, and we've been friends for a really long time. We got to know each other when we were both in the poetry slam community in another lifetime. And I feel like, Emilee, you do bring your actor perspective sometimes. Like you just have a bit of a different way of looking at, how things are created, what that looks like. You have a more of an intimacy with, being inside of a story than I do. My perspective is a little more as a therapist and as, I pull on my English literature training where we would read texts in these deep ways. And you have some of that too with your poetry background and so on. So yeah, and you love TV as well.
Very true.
So WandaVision specifically, I feel like we got to talk about WandaVision with you because it's about TV, basically. Okay, so let me do a little recap of Don't Worry, Darling and WandaVision. And I feel like we're probably talking to a bit of a niche group of people who've seen both of these things because we cannot have this conversation without spoilers. There's no way that we can do that without talking about the mystery that is resolved in both of these. So if you're listening and you're okay with being spoiled, please stay. You can, I find sometimes, when you know what a certain thing is about, you can read it in a different way rather than just spending the whole time trying to figure out the mystery. You can look at it from different perspectives. And if you hate being spoiled, go watch them, come back and listen later. So in both Don't Worry, Darling and WandaVision, we open in kind of an idyllic 1950s scenario. We have a childless couple who's very happy together. And in both of these, I'll call them stories, I guess, we have this very idyllic, stereotypical kind of 1950s environment where, at least at first, there's no sense of what we know was not so great about that time, specifically, the gender norms. We know that was a time when the problem that had no name was a big issue. A lot of women were deeply depressed and not knowing how to express that because the gender norms were so strict at the time. Don't Worry, Darling deals with this more than WandaVision does. But there are a bunch of other, I thought, kind of almost eerie similarities. So we've got a husband who's working a job that is undefinable, cannot be defined. In WandaVision, there's a funny moment where Vision, who's the name of the husband, is trying to figure out what his job is. And he keeps asking people and nobody can answer his question of what it is that he actually does. Both worlds are very focused on conformity. So in WandaVision, there's a lot of we have to fit in, we have to, seem as if we fit into this community and conform in these ways. In Don't Worry, Darling, there's a lot of, choreographed dancing together. And there's a lot of phrases that people repeat in a sense that, we're all in this together and we can't ask questions. The two actually share an actor. There's an actor who's Norm in WandaVision is also one of Jack's friends in Don't Worry, Darling. In both cases, there is a character who chooses to be in this world and complies with its ethical issues because they'd rather live in a world where their children exist than in a world where they didn't. And we'll talk more about that later. Wanda actually says, "Don't worry, darling," at a certain point to Vision. Alice never says that. I don't think it's ever spoken out loud in Don't Worry, Darling, but it is in WandaVision. In both worlds, the characters can't leave. there's a moment when Agatha explains that when we try to leave, it just goes out of our heads. Like we change our mind. And in WandaVision, there's a doctor who was going to go on vacation, but they just decide not to. And they don't really know why they decide not to, but they just don't. In both cases, the perfect world starts to feel wrong pretty early on. So there's this sort of idyllic perfection, and then there are little indications that something's not so right. In both cases, one of those symbols is an aircraft. There's a toy helicopter, or it's like a drone that turns into a toy, I think, in Wanda's world, that's color where everything else is black and white. And in Don't Worry, Darling, it's a toy airplane. In both texts, there is a dinner party scene where someone is insistently asking about life before this place, and no one can answer that question. In both cases, the world is essentially about mind control and sort of hypnosis in a way. And I found these similarities so eerie that I looked them up, and I don't think they can be speaking to each other directly, because WandaVision came out in early 2021, I think it was, and Don't Worry, Darling came out in like September of 2022, which is way too close together for someone to have watched WandaVision, thought about it, wrote a script in accordance to that, and then created a movie. Even though they shared an actor, maybe there were some shared things about the script going around. There might also be some clues in the Marvel universe that I didn't pick up on because I haven't watched the whole Marvel universe, and WandaVision does reference the Marvel universe, but I don't get the sense that there are any Marvel movies that go this deeply into someone's inner world.
I feel like with WandaVision, like that you're talking about the Marvel of it all. I also am like not familiar with the Marvel of it all, but I know that this either comes right after one of these Marvel movies when like the inciting incident of Vision's, spoiler alert, we already talked about that, but spoiler alert, Vision's death, like precipitates all of this like world building for Wanda's perspective. And I think they kind of touch on that in like the later episodes when it all kind of gets revealed. But yeah, it's interesting with Don't Worry, Darling, because trope of like the 1950s ideal, wait, the veneer cracks, not so much, the control aspect of it all. I feel like that's a common story in pop culture. Like we've seen it, the Stepford Wives, which I think was a remake of an original Stepford Wives. Like the one that I'm thinking of is obviously the Nicole Kidman version, but I think there's one even that comes before that. And I even think of movies like The Hours, where Julianne Moore's character in that same era has like all of this like deep depression and is suicidal and is also a housewife. Like I think it's a common theme, and it can be explored in like all of these different ways, which is really interesting. But yeah, I do feel like the proximity in which these stories were told, it's interesting because I was just reading up on WandaVision before signing on, and it was filmed because it started to film and then the lockdowns happened. So they stopped production and then picked up production again in September of 2020, and then it like was released in 2021. So and then I'm sure Don't Worry, Darling probably had script development overlapping over that time. So there might have been some references, but maybe not mindful references, but just because this story is like really pervasive, it's something that like we keep coming back to as a culture, is talking about this like the veneer cracking and like what is perfection, and this aspect of like just trying to like desperately control everything to make it like this perfect, shiny, idealized world is like, yeah, I feel like it's a compelling question for sure.
And they're both pandemic era stories as well. And during the pandemic, we were all living through this kind of strange, relatively mild apocalypse, right? Like we were sort of living a horror movie that we've seen over and over again. And I feel like some of the strangeness of that came with the isolation part, where I think for some people, we were living in family units, right? And suddenly there's no community, there's nowhere to take your child. The children are not in school, like you're just at home with your partner and your child if you have that kind of family structure. Of course, not everyone does. It was a different kind of nightmare for people who didn't have anyone that they were living with. And I know many stories of people who were like trying to get divorced right as the pandemic happened, and then they were stuck have it like with no choice but to stay together and keep co-parenting because there was no other way to do it. And so I feel like both of these movies have this kind of claustrophobia, this idea that you can't leave, right? I think, well, in both of them, you know, in Don't Worry, Darling, it's like, okay, you can go to this street, but you can't go beyond that. And the one rule is that you don't go into the area where the headquarters is. And in WandaVision, she says over and over, like, you can go as far as Ellerslie Street or whatever it is. I forget what the street was named, but you can't go beyond that border. And so in both cases, it's like you have to kind of do the best you can with this world that you're just suddenly found yourself in. Like whatever that world is, you're stuck there. It's sort of like being frozen in time. And I think a lot of us during the pandemic felt that way. WandaVision deals explicitly with grief. And Don't Worry, Darling is more about wanting to correct for a world that feels like it's gone wrong. I think there are a lot of ways you can read what that is, but I think, so in Don't Worry, Darling, the orchestrator of that world is Frank, who is this kind of red pill incel, Jordan Peterson type. Like, I'm sure Chris Pine studied Jordan Peterson's speeches in order to play this character because the cadence is so similar.
Yeah, I read something that said that he did, or maybe somebody just already drew that inference. But yeah, it's definitely a huge influence on that character for sure.
Yeah. And so this is somebody who's saying, you know, today victory, which is the name of the town, tomorrow the world, right? Like we want to correct for, specifically in this case, the gender imbalances. And this Frank character in the real world has all these YouTube videos that Jack has been watching, and he's been sort of teaching these, you know, disillusioned young men, we need to go back to this 1950s time when men were men and women were women and we all fit into these roles and everyone was happier. Like that's what he's sort of selling to Jack, who ends up buying into this and then coercing his girlfriend Alice into becoming a part of this world. And all of these other people are coerced into it as well. In WandaVision, it's actually unconscious to begin with. Wanda is this incredibly powerful telepath witch. I'm not so familiar with the Marvel universe. I hadn't watched the movie. I think there's a couple movies that reference what happens right before WandaVision, but she has this, she loses her husband or her partner, whatever he was, Vision. And it's just this intense grief that kind of creates this world around her that she didn't even mean to create. And she sort of starts to realize what's going on as the show goes on, and Vision starts to realize what's going on. And it turns out actually he's dead. And like she's created a new version of him that can only exist within this world. And there's the heartbreaking moment at the end where she kind of has to choose between, do I set free all of the people that I have sort of unintentionally looped into my grief world, who at a certain point it's revealed they're all feeling her grief with her. It's like this incredible power of empathy where they're in incredible pain because they feel what she's feeling while they're under her control. And then she has to choose between letting these people go free and like keeping her children and her husband who she's created inside of this world and they can't survive outside of it, which we'll get back to, and I might start to cry again.
I feel like in watching Don't Worry, Darling, when that reveal happened that she was the one who was like choosing that so that she could like have her kids stay in her life or like I think that they had maybe died in the real world. It was like such a compelling moment in that story because I feel like with like Don't Worry, Darling, like the incel of it all and like these men trying to control these women and all of that is like something that I think a lot of us who are femme or femme adjacent are like familiar with and understand the implications of on a daily basis. But I want a spin-off of the Olivia Wilde character. Like I want to know more about her choice. And I think that if there was a spin-off on that character, it would actually probably really resemble WandaVision.
It would be WandaVision, yeah.
It's like this person who's like overwhelmed by their grief. And how did she, you know, like I'm like wondering the whole time, like how did she encounter these videos? Like what made her like, how did that get into her algorithm, you know? Because like if you have that algorithm, you might be in a different kind of world than those of us who don't. So,
or was it through her partner, or was her partner also an invention of this world? We actually never find out if her partner is a real person on the other side, or if she's just doing this to herself and has created a husband the way Wanda did. We don't know. There's a lot of like, it does sort of feel like Don't Worry, Darling in a way is an alternate universe prequel to WandaVision. It's like we find out you know, by the end of Don't Worry, Darling, we're like, oh my gosh, like what happens next? And why did these characters do this? And what happened? And, you know, we find out the mystery towards the end, whereas WandaVision has a different trajectory. And one thing I find interesting, I was wondering your perspective on this, but it starts in 1950s, but then it shifts, it time shifts all the time. It's always a sitcom. And for Wanda, the sitcom is like her safe place. That's where she goes to, you know, deal with her grief, like throughout her life. And so it continues to be, it's like a 60s sitcom and then a 70s sitcom and then it's a 90s sitcom. And it just kind of continues in this same sort of trope. But we also find out about the Marvel Universe characters who have found out that she's got this world and they're trying to get her out of it and get the people rescued out of it and all of these things. So we get to find out so much more about why this happened, how Wanda feels about it, how she deals with her grief, how she gets out of this situation, how she rescues the people from the situation, how Vision deals with it, what happens with her children. You know, there are people in the real world on the other side who are also dealing with their grief, like Monica, who's really trying to help her, has lost her mom, and it's not as rich. I feel like that storyline, we don't get as much out of it. I feel like that was explored more in one of the Marvel movies. But, you know, there's this parallel of grief on the other side and Monica dealing with it in her own ways, which is kind of not dealing with it, really. She's just like, let's go to work. Yeah. And that's kind of what she does, right? But it was really interesting. And I also was reading about how, like, this is a huge departure from most Marvel Universe stuff. Like, it's usually an action movie and there might be some poignant moments here or there, but you don't go so deeply into a character's psyche as in WandaVision. And we actually get to see, like, what happens with Wanda after she... after she has to re-experience her grief by ending this world that she's created, and then her life goes on, and we actually see a little bit of her life going on. And so I feel like, in a way, like, WandaVision was sort of like watching a little bit of the end of Don't Worry, Darling that I wanted, you know, that sort of sense of like, what happens now? Like, what about this? Like, how do these characters deal with it? What happens to the world? You know, what happens to Frank? All of these things, because that movie leaves you with so many questions at the end.
Yeah, totally. And I think you were talking about, like, the world of, like, sitcoms and how there's this, like, escapism of going into these worlds. Like, reading these worlds, it goes through these different time periods into these, like, sitcom tropes. Like, everything is so predictable and the conflict gets resolved, like, by the end of the episode. And, like, the conflict is often, like, in the form of hijinks and, like, silliness. Like, even in the, you know, the first episode, it's so alone just as an episode of television. Like, even with all of the backstory, you're like, because I think you texted me and you're like, oh, I thought this was just like a 1950s sitcom, and then it turns into this whole other thing. And
if I didn't know that it went in a different direction, I would not have been able to continue watching that show, because the first episode is so saccharine. Like, it's just so sweet and perfect in a way that's quite off-putting. And they actually released WandaVision in weekly episodes, which was interesting because I feel like as a whole text that you can binge, you know, or like if it was a movie that you could watch all at once, the saccharine beginning, it makes so much sense once you get to the end and you're like, oh, that's why, like, I get it. But if I just thought it was going to be that, like, oh, I have to watch this sitcom about superheroes, if you hadn't told me to keep going, I wouldn't have. I would have been just like, no, thanks, this is weird.
Yeah, totally. Because it's like the quick wit and the silliness, but, like, there's nothing really more than that happening.
You and we've both have some intimacy with Grey's Anatomy, specifically. It's like a grief show, right? Like a grief rewatch, you know? And I saw something a little while ago about how rewatching old shows is a really common way that people manage their anxiety, right? Because it's like, it's predictable. I can watch it over and over again. I know what the story is. You know, when I was going through a really hard time in my life, Grey's Anatomy was a big one that I would watch over and over again. Like, I've watched Friends a couple times. I've watched Buffy a couple times. And I know that that's something that you do as well. So, you know, if you're thinking about it from that perspective, maybe even a post-COVID perspective, or, you know, during COVID, in 2020, I think The Office was the biggest show, like, on Netflix. Like, everybody was watching The Office because they were just like, ooh, something comforting from the before times that, like, don't feel as scary and horrible as the reality we're living right now, right?
Yeah, totally. And it's so funny with Grey's because I feel like, getting into it when I went through a really bad breakup, I think you had recommended it to me, actually. You're like, you should watch Grey's Anatomy. And I was like, okay. And, like, I mean, the first time I watched it, it was like such compelling storytelling, like the acting. I was like, oh my God. And like watching TV in this way that had, you know, a diversity of perspectives. Like, I mean, Sandra, oh, come on. Like, she's freaking amazing. I'm obsessed with Christina Yang as a character. I want to be friends with that character. But since that time, like, I think that was about 10 years ago, like, I have rewatched at least the first 5 seasons of that show. Probably like, I've lost count, like definitely more than 5, like probably 10, like at least. And usually I can't get past 5. Like, I don't like the season finale of 6. It's the shooter episode. Spoiler alert for Grey's Anatomy from 10 years ago. But like that one is like too much for me. But yeah, the first 5 seasons, and it's like there's something about the experience of watching something, and obviously it's kind of different than like, let's say, Wanda's comfort shows of these like 50s and 80s sitcoms where everything is so predictable and tropey and the conflict is not big. Like, whereas with Grey's, it's like the conflict is huge. Like, there's a bomb in the chest cavity, huge. Like, things are happening, and it's like the stakes are life and death. And there's something about like you're going through your own grief, and you're watching somebody else go through grief that is like insurmountable, unbelievable life or death circumstances. And it allows a bit of a dissociation quality happening with it. But then there's also this ability to process your own emotions in an empathetic way where you are feeling the feelings of the characters. You are expressing those feelings as you're watching these things happen. You're like, oh my God, like, you know, like, get like emotional thinking of that. Like, oh, she's like, yeah, I'm like, that's so relatable, even though I've never had my hand in a chest cavity with a bomb in it. But like, there's something about, yeah, you're watching somebody else go through something, and it gives you permission to like feel your feelings. And ooh, like, people really got into Friends, and like, I'm probably gonna get a lot of hate for this, but I'm like, I literally cannot rewatch. Like, I cannot rewatch Friends. Like, oof, like, I mean, it's a lot of like the silliness, the cartooniness is like fine and whatever. And I think the actors are doing a great job, but like, just the characters are dark. I'm like, Ross is like an incel dark character, and I don't want to like.
Ross is so dark. Yeah.
And it's like, it's so weird that like when we watch Friends, it's like, oh, haha, Ross is such a grumpy old jerk. But I'm like, but and then, you know, bringing it to the Don't Worry Darling, like, he is Harry Styles, like that character.
Yeah.
Like, if we put it in a different universe, Ross
he would put Rachel in an alternate world where he could control her mind. Absolutely, 100%. He would do that. Exactly. That's Ross.
Yeah,
for sure.
Like, he's already kind of doing that in the real world, you know, like, he manipulates her. So,
we were talking about that a little bit in the Wayne's World episode of this podcast, because Wayne's World, for me and Jeff and Mel, who were with me on that podcast, you know, it's a nostalgia for us, right? It's like, reminds us of that time when we were children. And, you know, there's complexity to Wayne's World, but it's also very simple. You know, like, it's a funny thing that you can kind of say the lines because you've watched it so many times and you know the cadence of the movie. I'm going to be doing another podcast on Return to Oz, which I feel like has a lot of that quality for me as well, of like the cadence, the aesthetic. You know, it was interesting watching it again this week and having a little bit more of a critical eye to it, because I've never done that before. I've only ever watched it as like this delightful thing from my childhood, right? Yeah. And so I think it is interesting that for Wanda, it's dissociation. You know, it's, as you said, these episodes. It was an era of television when everything was episodic. Nothing continued from one episode to the next. Forgive me if I'm wrong on this. I think Friends might have been one of the first sitcoms to be non-episodic, in the sense that there were storylines that continued throughout an entire season or throughout seasons. And so there was an investment in the characters that many viewers at that time had never experienced before. People wanted to know if Ross and Rachel were going to get together, you know, what happens with that next? Like, you know, is Monica going to have her baby? All these things. And so, you know, we that was like that era of TV where we started to care about whether or not certain things were happening with the characters over time. And it is interesting that you say that about Grey's Anatomy, because I kind of remember, for me, I remember watching Grey's a lot when I was trying to process a trauma that wasn't yet conscious for me. So because it took me quite a while to kind of understand that I had had an experience of sexual assault it took me a while to like look back and see like, oh, that's what happened, and that's how it happened, and that was the manipulation, and that's how these are the reasons why, like in my mind, I just assumed that was all my fault, and like it took me a long time to sort of sort out what that was.
Yeah.
And I feel like watching Grey's Anatomy, there would be these moments that were so emotional that they would allow my tears to come. And I think at the time I wasn't able to be conscious enough about what had happened to me to feel angry or feel sad, because I didn't have a narrative for it in my head. And so I think Grey's Anatomy and I don't know, The OC was a little bit of that for me too. I think maybe in a different era, but you know, these shows that are so dramatic and these people are going through these incredibly hard things. And on the one hand, you're thinking like, you know, wow, they have it worse than me. Like I can get through this. But on the other hand, like empathizing inside of this show is allowing me to feel feelings that I have a hard time feeling. Yeah. And so it's interesting to think about Wanda's power in WandaVision as a power of empathy, because she ropes this entire town into her experience of grief. And they're all experiencing a grief she can't. Because in the beginning, she doesn't even realize what she's doing. And she probably knows, I mean, she remembers, I think, her past life and stuff. Vision doesn't. There's a moment where Vision's like, I can't remember my life before this place. Like, what is my life? Like, who am I? And she remembers hers, I think, but she's sort of, oh, this is great. I found myself in this lovely place where my husband hasn't died and I can just, you know, be a suburban housewife and that's going to be great. And, you know, she doesn't realize she's hurting other people with the pain that she's feeling, and the other people and the other sort of symptoms of trauma that start popping up throughout her experience start to nudge her into like the theme of the show. And I think what Monica continually tells Wanda is like, you have to actually feel this grief. Like you can't just escape into this world and bring everybody with you. Like you have to feel it. And that's, of course, it's very simple. And that's the therapist perspective as well with grief, is that you have to actually feel it. That's the only thing that you can do with grief to get through it, is actually feel it, whether that includes anger, rage, you know, sadness, sorrow, all of those things. There's no way around it, and there's no way to speed past it. You know, avoidance is the way that we often do that, and that can be effective and in some cases necessary. But ultimately, if we're going to heal, we have to feel, which again is a cliche, but it is like everything I do in my practice as a therapist is like, let's slow down and feel that feeling in our bodies, you know. That's it. Like that's the whole healing process, right?
Yeah. And it's interesting because I feel like, you know, we've had this conversation. I've started studying acting in this way that is all about like being aware of the feelings in your body, not judging them, but just feeling them and expressing them. And yeah, I feel like Grey's Anatomy and these shows that I've watched have given me, you know, a lot of like support to be able to like have those feelings. And now I'm sort of in a place where I can courageously and bravely like actually sit in the feelings that I have and express them. But I did need that for like a good, like almost 10 years, like of rewatching these shows. And I mean, of course, I'm simultaneously in therapy and like processing these things in different ways. But yeah, I feel like putting it in the body and like feeling it in the body is so, being present in your body is a terror when you're experiencing such profound emotions. And I think about that episode in WandaVision where, I think it's the 70s episode where Geraldine, or like the Monica, but she's Geraldine in the series, like in the fake show. She's like helping her have her baby or whatever. And then at the end, she says something like, I know about Ultron, or like whatever the Marvel lore is about Vision. And then Wanda like pushes her through, and you have that like image where she's going through all the fences and then like gets thrown out of the hex or the curse area or whatever. And, you know, it's like she represents a threat. She represents like the person who's saying like, you need to be present and like, this isn't real. What you're doing right now isn't real. You're not actually feeling anything. This, like, let me tell you what actually happened. And it's like, she's all of a sudden a threat to this stability, this world that's been created to protect her from those things. So she must be ejected from the universe. So
that's what we call in the biz a trigger, right? It's like something pops through to be like, hi, like this thing happened to you, remember? And, you know, for many people, trigger we respond to triggers with fight or flight, right?
Yeah.
And Wanda fights, right? She kicks Geraldine slash Monica right out of her world.
Yeah.
And that happens a few times. Like when her world is threatened, she goes into fight mode. And that is often how triggers work. Because when we're having trauma triggers, our system is in a traumatized state, which means, among other things, that the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, whatever the instinct is, hasn't been resolved. Like it never left our bodies. We're still stuck in that place. And the way many of us cope is through the avoidance tactics that we've been talking about. And a trigger comes up to dysregulate the functionality that we have like a white knuckle grip on in order to get through the day, which again, we may not even be conscious of, right? So I feel like thinking about WandaVision as a metaphor for trauma is really powerful because this is how trauma can work, right? Like something happens that we cannot process, like her, I think in her case, again, I didn't see the movie, they refer to it a little bit in WandaVision, but she had to kill Vision in order to save the world, which worked, and Vision came back, but then Ultron killed him anyway, so she had to watch him die twice. And then a third time through her own doing when she has to essentially kill him at the end, when she takes this world down. But what I thought was so interesting is that there's an episode where Agatha, who's this character who's like the nosy neighbor, she's had a few little moments of disruption for Wanda, right? Like there's an episode where she comes in and something isn't going the way Wanda wants. And so Agatha says, "Oh, do you want me to take that from the top?"
Yeah.
And Wanda's like, "What?" And she's like, "Oh, do you want me to just start the scene again? And because you want me to hold the babies, right?" And Wanda's like, "Oh, what's happening?" And then she does one of her jump cuts, I think. Or maybe previously she would have done a jump cut where it's just like, let's delete that and like go back to the way it's supposed to look. And so Agatha is the only one that seems to have these moments of self-awareness that something is going on, and it disrupts Wanda's world. Pietro also comes in, who is in the WandaVision world. Wanda knows her brother has died, but then he shows up as an actor. This is a reference to some Marvel Universe thing. He was an actor. He was a Marvel Universe character in something else, this actor, but not the actor who played Pietro. So it was like a different actor, but still within the Marvel Universe. So I think for Marvel people, it would have been like, what's happening? Like, how are the worlds, colliding and intertwining? And I think within Marvel that there's a whole multiverse idea, right? And so, we can be in these different universes, I guess, at the same time. And so Pietro comes in and disrupts again by asking all these questions, and like he sort of says out loud what he thinks is happening. And there's a moment where she says, "What are you doing here?" And he says, "Well, I've come in," I forget exactly what he says, but it's something like, "I've come in to create some friendly brotherly hijinks and make you face what's happened to you. Isn't that what you wanted?" And Wanda's face in that moment is like, I'm not sure if that's what I wanted or not. Maybe. And it turns out, so there's an episode where, the Agatha All Along episode, where Agatha reveals herself as this evil witch, who's actually been disrupting Wanda's world the whole time. And she's the one who's been making the decor in the house change from 50s to 60s to 70s, and like having some things happen that aren't within Wanda's control, because the whole world is theoretically controlled by Wanda. So the way that the story went is that this was real. Agatha is actually a powerful witch, and she was kind of the villain of the story, and they fight and so on. And it continues on, I think, in order to create more potential storylines for Marvel to continue on this series. But I kind of wish that the story had actually gone, that we found out that Wanda was recruiting her nosy neighbor Agatha to become the villain for her, so she didn't have to be the villain herself. Because again, I feel like that would fit in so much more to kind of the traumatized delusion of the whole thing, where she's trying to create this world where, yes, she does want to touch a little bit on the trauma. From my perspective as a therapist, our systems want to heal. Our systems always want to heal. They're always trying to heal. And a trigger is actually the system trying to, it's like desperately reaching out to something that is trying to get the wound to come to the surface so that it can be dealt with. But we resist that because there are these other parts of us that fear feeling those feelings, or don't feel safe to feel those feelings, or don't know how to process it, or don't have a safe place to process it, or, for many different reasons, the system protects us, just the way Wanda's world protects her. But, you know, it would make sense to me that she would have these disruptions to her world as symptoms of trauma, right? That was kind of how I figured out that something was wrong, is I had all these symptoms, you know? I had like hypervigilance and startle response and certain triggers to things that seemed to be related to sexual assault. And like those were the things that were the clues that were placed in the path where I was like, oh, maybe this is what happened. And then I started to kind of figure it out. It was like a mystery that I didn't even realize I needed to solve, but my body was trying to be like, hey, pay attention to this. Hey, pay attention to that. Right. And so I feel like how poignant would it have been if there was all this drama with Agatha and then it turned out Agatha was under her mind control that whole time, being the villain she didn't have to be, because ultimately it did turn out she was hurting all these people. She didn't really want to, but she was kind of being a villain. And in order to stop being a villain, she had to essentially literally kill her husband and children. So it would make sense to me that her system would have found a way to try to protect her from that as well, right?
Oh my gosh, yeah, I love that idea that Agatha, who's like kind of the Kimmy, what's that character from Full House? Is it Kimmy Gibbler? Like,
that sounds right, yeah.
Like the sort of like kind of annoying, but you're sort of laughing, like, oh, here comes this character. Like, even in I feel like that 80s episode where she's like, do you want me to take it again? Like, that's, I think, the episode where she's like, that's the 80s one where she kind of like,
right.
It almost looks identical to the set of Full House, like, which is also kind of...
It does, yeah. It seems to be a reference to Full House, yeah.
Yeah, and it's, like, interesting because Elizabeth Olsen's older sisters played the Michelle character, which is, like...
Right.
I wonder how meta that, like, how aware she was that they were going to make that reference or whatever, but, yeah, no, I love that because Agatha's character is, like, that sort of chaos character in the sitcom tropes of, like, you're like, oh god, this character's here, which means that something's about to get, you know, messed up because this person never brings it. They're not a calming presence. They're like an activating presence. So, yeah, that's interesting in the metaphor of like trauma of how, yeah, she might have manifested almost this like thing that she could like project her, like her villainness or like her villain vibe. I can't think of a word for it.
Archetype, the villain archetype.
Here we go. That's the one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nosy neighbor / villain / monstrous feminine.
Yes. The monstrous feminine, which I think actually, I mean, in like the Marvel verse of it all, like Agatha All Along is another spin-off to this series, which is currently airing. This is an unpaid promo, but like, literally it's...
I know you've been watching it. I haven't yet, but yeah.
It's not all out yet. It's still like, sort of like, they dropped, I think, 3 episodes and now they're going week by week, but it's really great. And it sort of explores that idea of the monstrous feminine. And it's very, very lesbian, which is, we love. And it's very, very witchy. But it's also interesting too, in like going back to WandaVision, how she's like, you are the chaos witch or whatever. You're the Scarlet Witch, the chaos.
The Scarlet Witch, yeah.
Like you're what does she call her? Like the chaos witch or something like that. Like you, and it's like the feeling of when you're in those experiences of grief and you're just trying to like not feel them. It's like the fear of the chaos, like exploding, like, what is it going to mean? And like, this happens a lot in my acting class where we're just like literally sitting there in full body relaxation. And, you know, a lot of the times we articulate that we're feeling scared. And my coach is just encouraging us to get really specific on what that fear is. And a lot of the time it's like, oh, I'm afraid to how big my feelings are. And she's like, we're in a safe place. Like, what could possibly happen? I can help you through any of that if anything happens. And so it's just interesting because it's like, ooh, like we're all just like, I don't want it. And then like when you do feel that, like sometimes it does overwhelm you. And sometimes it's like, oh, I'm just feeling very sad. And it's okay to feel sad. And, you know.
Yeah, I feel like it was interesting to have this sort of meta experience of watching WandaVision for myself. I don't binge show. I barely have time to binge shows because I have a 3-year-old. I found time to binge this show. I was like, excuse me for 20 minutes. Like, I have to finish watching this show.
Yeah.
And I was enjoying it for a lot of different reasons. And it definitely has that kind of fun, you know, playful, interesting, you know, it's that engagement of like, what's the mystery? I have to find out what the mystery is. as I've mentioned, so Vision and the children are figments of her world. So they're real in the sense that they have sentience, they have their own experiences, but they can't exist outside of this world. She and Vision both realize this world can't go on and they have to say goodbye. She puts her children to bed, knowing she's never going to see them again. And she and Vision have this conversation where he is very explicitly consenting to essentially his death, because he's like, I understand what's happening here. I love you. Like, maybe there's some way that I'll exist again. And sure enough, Vision is like this, he's made of vibranium. He's like the sort of droid character that can be recreated. And so like he knows he may have another life at some point, but the children won't. And then the world dies and her children, oh my God, I'm going to cry. So for me, like watching this, so I've had many miscarriages. And for me, that was what the experience was like. Those children were real, like those imagined children that were in my body, even though after loss, I was really trying not to plan for the future and so on. Like that soul feels so real to you. And they have this potential of becoming this part of your life in this way that you imagine. And then they're gone, right? And it's like, for me, the miscarriages are, an invisible grief. It's like something that is hard to express to somebody who hasn't been through that, because it goes invisible, right? And so for Wanda, when she has to kill her world and her children don't exist anymore, to anyone else, it's like, that was just a figment of your imagination, like that's gone. But to her, that was so real. And I feel like that's exactly what a miscarriage feels like. It's so real inside of yourself and inside of your inner world. And no one can see it and nobody understands what it is. And for many people who've had miscarriages, when and if you do have a healthy child, it's like, well, that replaces it, but that grief doesn't go away. Like you're still grieving the lost children, even though, even if hopefully you get to have a healthy child on the other side and you have a relationship with that child, but it's a different child, right? So I sobbed, like I was not expecting. So that was a trigger for me, right? It was sort of like all of a sudden from the depths. And like I've dealt with my miscarriages in many ways. Like, of course, I've done lots of therapy and feeling about them. I'm okay with having a trigger, but it still arises every now and then, right? So it's kind of funny to watch this show that was like so diverting and interesting and fun for me. And then all of a sudden it was like, guess what? One of your worst traumas in your life right in front of your face. And I was like, whoo, like, okay. It's like, woo, give me a minute here.
And
right?
It's like, not even just like a trigger that sort of comes up arbitrarily. It's like Wanda is literally dealing with this thing that I think you're right. Like, I don't know if it's an intentional metaphor by the writers, but it does feel very specific to that. Like, it's not just that she imagined these kids and they're gone. It's like they had these children and then she's moving forward and she can no longer have them anymore. So it's so funny too, because typically conversely, I watch a lot of TV and I don't have a 3-year-old and I have a lot of time and I love to watch TV. It's one of my favorite things to do. And I typically, when I'm recommending shows to you, I'm like, always telling you if there's children in danger.
Yeah, my big trigger. Yeah.
Like,
baby's in danger. It's in everything.
Yeah, I'm like, you gotta watch this, but just so you know, baby's in danger, and then you decide if you're okay, if you want to. And I don't think that I said that to you for this one, because I think that I was so excited and inspired by the metaphor for grief and just like tying it back to Don't Worry Darling, like the fake world and like the comment on like the stronghold of patriarchy and like all of these things that you and I just kind of casually talk about all the time. I was like, oh my God, you would love this show, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, it absolutely is about that and so profoundly about that. Like not even, I just like haven't seen a show really tackle it. And I think also having the world of Marvel where it's like there is like fantastical things that can happen and there's this like larger than life kind of like fantasy and I feel like all of that lends itself well to like really being so specific and big with the metaphor that it's not this just like subtle thing. It's like, yeah, we're talking about grief, we're talking about loss, we're talking about processing trauma, like all of those things.
So from what I understand, you are not a superhero type of person. Like, I feel like for me, I go to fantasy maybe for the same reasons you rewatch, right? Like, I love fantasy. There was a period of time where I was really into like youth sci-fi fantasy books because again, I needed to be in a different world, right? Again, that's what Wanda's doing. That's what Jack is doing in Don't Worry, Darling. It's like, let me just be in a world where like there's magic and everything is great. But normally you're just not so much into like the superhero fantasy stuff, but this you loved. Like you really wanted me to watch WandaVision. So maybe just say a bit more about like why this was the exception for you.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, because a lot of the times people will say like, "Oh, watch this fantasy." Like, I will watch pretty much anything, but I do find a bit of a barrier sometimes when it comes to fantasy worlds because you have to sort of learn and accept the rules of the world to be able to um like just like exist in the story and like witness the story. And there's a lot of like rules about the world that you're sort of learning as you watch it. And I think like really great shows that, there's a lot of great fantasy shows that do that in such a way that you're not like, wait, why? Like you're not piecing it together and getting frustrated. But I feel like I am kind of impatient. So I'm always just like, I just need to know. But a lot of the time when I do go and watch those shows, once I get into it, I really like it, but it's like, it's not going to be the thing that I reach for. But I feel like this is different because I think it picked up on like, it was an emotional journey to like understanding the rules of the world. I really am not in the Marvel universe. I will decidedly not watch any of those movies, but I will watch WandaVision and Agatha all along. I think probably because the stories center women and like it's less about the fighting and the action and like the, not so subtle undertones of American imperialism, like being like, look at them winning and beating all of the bad guys. It's like, it's a really more intricate and nuanced, understanding of those same worlds where these superheroes exist. But yeah, it didn't feel for me like a superhero fantasy world, even though it obviously is both of those things. I tend to go towards shows that deal with like grief and sadness, and I mean Superstore doesn't really do that, but like it's definitely on my rotation. Gilmore Girls is one that I watch. I haven't rewatched it in a while actually because I got just like kind of frustrated with that world, but Grey's, I rewatch a lot of these shows where it just like feels like the conflict is so real. Like it feels like it could be something that my friends are going through, even though a lot of the time, like Grey's Anatomy, like I said, is like, it can be really heightened stakes or whatever, but the humanness of it is really like the hook for me, like the digging of the emotions. Cause yeah, I think that I go to TV and stuff to feel my feelings because you can be more courageous when you're doing it, like on behalf of somebody else or like in watching their tragedies. It's like, I can express my sadness when I watch, like, I'm trying to think of an example, like Meredith just be like, oh, I guess nobody loves me, like I'm like, I can express like my own version of that while watching her feel that way. Which is interesting because like a doctor show, it's like, what do I even know about being a doctor? Like literally nothing. But like, so it could be said that it's the same thing as like a fantasy where you have to learn a lot of rules. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like because the hook was so like emotion and story driven that it felt less of a barrier for me to like go in and watch those things. Huh?
Yeah, and I feel like that piece about men's stories centering men, male, masculine, patriarchal narratives, that's the standard for superhero movies. Mm-hmm. And, I think that's changing, maybe especially in the Marvel universe, like the Marvels, Ms. Marvel, like all that stuff. They're sort of trying to go maybe in a different direction with it. But, it's making me think of Don't Worry, Darling again, because that's a world... Like, that story is in part about a woman breaking through a patriarchal fantasy, right? In a similar kind of trauma way where there are these things that surface, right, that bubble up for her, where she has these moments where the world doesn't make sense. Like, if you remember that scene where she's crushing the eggs and there's nothing inside of them, they're just these empty eggshells. you know, there's these sort of eerie moments that don't make sense to her mind. And she's bubbling up out of this hypnosis. Like, I think you could look at that as the way women and femmes and men, actually, maybe everybody, are kind of waking up to, like, what is this patriarchal fantasy that we're living in, right? What is this patriarchal world where certain people are given power and certain people are not given power? And how does gender play into that, and how does my gender expression play into that, right? I think, again, to that 1950s world, you know, the one similarity, actually, the two worlds have in common that I forgot to mention before, is they both have a group of people who's conspicuously absent. And in WandaVision, it's children, until she realizes there are no children, and then children come in. And in Don't Worry, Darling, it's old people and ugly people. Everyone in Don't Worry, Darling is, like, super hot.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because Harry Styles, and I love the casting of Harry Styles for Don't Worry, Darling, because he's a performer, right? And, you know, in the world of Don't Worry, Darling, he's really beautiful and he's got this perfect skin. And then when we see him in the quote unquote real world, he's got acne and his hair is all kind of like greasy and lank, and he's like not really very attractive at all on that side of things. And I thought that was so cool to see this pop star heartthrob guy kind of being transformed into this incel, you know, like little, like, I don't know what the word for it would be, like with his hood up, and he's kind of just like this ugly little troll in his apartment where, you know, he's got this woman literally strapped to the bed and he's trying to do it out of love. I don't know. It's a really wild thing to think about. But, you know, maybe part of what's interesting about that story for me is watching a woman, succeed in escaping a patriarchal fantasy, which in many ways is the world we live in, you know, as many people have been trying to shift it and get out of it and things have been improving. I think, you know, many men are waking up to, like, what is this patriarchal fantasy I live in? Like, what does it mean to have to fit in terms of masculinity? What does it mean for me? What do I have to trade to keep power in a world that says only a certain type of man can be powerful, and so on? Like, I think a lot of us want to get out of it, but we're not. Like, we absolutely do still live in a patriarchal world that's also capitalist and white supremacist and all these other things. And so, you know, at the end of that movie, we see Alice escaping. Like, she's literally running away from a horde of men who are chasing her, is what's happening at the end. And, you know, maybe there's something interesting too. There's so many mirrors in that movie, which I feel like there's some obviousness to the metaphor of, like, reflections and what's real and not real and so on. But she puts her hands on this mirror. It's like she touches herself, right? And that's what wakes her up and gets her away from this horde of men chasing her at the end. And then we don't know what happens next because she's still strapped to the bed and Jack is dead beside her. Like, how's she going to get out? Hopefully she can at least get those things off her eyes and, like, figure something out, scream for help. Who knows? Yeah. We certainly have hope that she gets away, but, you know, maybe that's part of the complication of it, is that those of us who try to wake up from the patriarchal fantasy, we don't get to completely escape, right? Like, I think there's so many ways in which, you know, we still have to perform our gender or not perform our gender, or dampen down certain aspects of our gender, or, you know, keep our bodies a certain size or not a certain size or whatever it is, in order to kind of, like, maintain the functionality and privilege and power that are even possible in a world that has such, like, strict hierarchies about who gets listened to, you know, who feels important, who gets to be president of the United States, which we don't have to get into some politics here. But yeah, you know, I think there's a lot there to think about in that sense as well.
Totally. And I feel like that's a thing too, where it's like, I'm currently in a space with my TV watching where I'm like, I don't think I want to watch stories that are about boys. Like, like, I was talking to my friend.
You left me a very funny voice note the other day about watching the first episode of Lost, that you were just like, this era of watching stories about men, like, I don't do this anymore.
I know, I'm like, wait, there's 3 main characters, they're all white men? Like, I'm sorry, but there's, like, you're gonna have to really work hard to make me fucking interested in this. Like, what? And that's the thing too, is I did a rewatch of Buffy recently as well, which love Buffy. And I was like, I think I should just try Angel. I've abandoned it. I can't, because it's like there's some, like, I love Charisma Carpenter. I love the girlies and the she's and theys and the gays. But when it's just like a brooding white man, I'm like, I just don't know. Which is why I think, like, with Don't Worry, Darling, it's like, it's about Florence Pugh. And I'm like, yes, give me Florence Pugh. Like, she's so pretty. She's such a compelling actor. Like, her choices are so exciting. And, like, she is just so engaging as an actor. And similarly with WandaVision, it's like, oh my gosh, all the women on this show, like, the men are kind of just there, but really it's like, it's about the women.
But as you were talking about Florence Pugh, I was also thinking of Midsummer, which she is also the star of Midsummer. And I don't think I need to spoil anything with Midsummer. We're not going to sort of talk about that deeply, but I think one way of reading that story is as a feminist fairy tale. And that's my favorite way of reading that story, because it's a very, very dark horror movie that I'm sure, do a whole podcast about Midsummer. I've watched it many times. I actually find it so interesting and so cool. But it's also about, it's also about a specific community that's like apart from everyone else, which Lost is also that same, like, watching it post-pandemic. Again, how is it going to feel different to watch, this group of people who are isolated, stuck together? Like, there's limits and boundaries to the world that they can live within. And Midsummer felt like that too, in a way where, like, certain people couldn't leave, there was a lot of conformity that was going on, but it was also about Florence Pugh kind of accessing power in this place in a way where, she becomes the queen, the Mayflower queen, or, I forget what it's called, but she's the queen of something at the end. And she's sort of literally sitting on a throne, with wielding all of this power sort of against the men that have wronged her in the movie. And so I feel like maybe in a similar way to Don't Worry, Darling, there's a lot of power in watching maybe specifically Florence Pugh, who's very feminine woman, right? Like, she's a little curvier than, the average Hollywood starlet that you'll see. She has, like, a lot of, like, innocence in her face that she can show. Like, the emotion on her face is really powerful. I think especially in Midsummer, you see her as kind of, like, there's a naivete to her in a way, and, like, a sort of thing that you want to protect. And then in Don't Worry, Darling, also she has that similar, like, she's such a happy, sexy, sort of housewife person. And the problems come when she starts to question, the world that she's in and all of that stuff. So I think, maybe there's also something interesting about looking at Florence Pugh specifically, whose gender is so explicitly feminine, in all of these ways, and how she's the heroine of these harrowing stories about male control and power. I wanted to jump in here really quickly because we had some issues with Emilee's audio and they disappeared towards the end of the podcast. So the next little bit, you're going to hear me talking to myself. Emilee had some great insights to add, and you can hear most of that reflected in what I'm saying. So I apologize that we lost Emilee there, but we will have them back on the podcast, not to worry. Yeah, so we didn't really have a chance to talk about the drama on the press tour because it doesn't have much to do with the movie. It was just like who's dating who and who broke up with who and why was Shia LaBeouf replaced by Harry Styles and are they enemies? Like, it was just a lot of that type of drama. But at one point, Olivia Wilde, who directed this movie, said that this movie was about female pleasure, and that a lot of what was talked about with this movie initially was that there's some eroticism, especially in the beginning, and the eroticism is very much focused around Alice's body. Olivia Wilde, I think, says at one point, none of the men come in this movie. The women come. And you're like, wait, what? Like, this movie is not about feminine pleasure. This movie is about women being forced into men's pleasure. This is about women literally being forced to live inside of the male gaze. And so it is interesting to see that, there are these erotic moments that are focused around, like, Jack goes down on Alice, Jack is touching Alice in this way that she finds pleasurable. Like, I don't think there's any insertion moments, which is a different way of portraying sex than you often see from a male gaze. But why? What did that have to do with anything? Like, that wasn't, this movie was really about oppression, from a patriarchal perspective. And so Olivia Wilde, who directed it, is promoting it as a movie that's about female pleasure and I mean, maybe she was just trying to get you off the scent or whatever so that you could kind of enjoy the twist of it all. But there's an extra twist in her having said that, as the director of this movie, like, what do you mean, Olivia Wilde? Like, why did you create this movie? What was your point, right? Like, the movie did feel a bit like, what if there was a world that the incels created and they could hypnotize women? And that's it's just the question. Like, it doesn't answer that question at all. It doesn't say, how would women react in the real world? What would the consequences be? What would it be like if someone chose to be in this place? Like, yeah, like we don't get any of the follow-up. And I feel like WandaVision was all about follow-up. It was all about the aftermath. It's all about what happens after, which was very powerful. Yeah. So thank you so much, Emilee, for being here and chatting with me about these two. I'm sure we will do more of these podcasts about various things that we're watching together and texting and leaving voice notes about. It was so much fun to just be talking about these. I really appreciate your insights. So thanks again for listening to our podcast about Don't Worry, Darling and WandaVision. If you've seen these two, what did you think? Please feel free to leave comments. I would love it if you would follow this podcast, share it with your friends. I suppose specifically the ones that have seen both Don't Worry, Darling and WandaVision, but you can also go back and listen to the library of podcasts we've done on shows and movies that you may have seen and loved or hated. And you can get in touch with me in a few different ways. My website is juliepeters.ca. I offer one-on-one counseling. I can do that from the Wellness Clinic where I work here in Edmonton. I can also do it online internationally. If you don't live even in Canada, I can still work with you. I also offer tarot readings, and I offer lots of different resources, blog posts, and so on my website. You can follow me at Julie Peters Wellness on Instagram or Popcorn Therapy on TikTok. And I am really hoping to hear from you. I would love to know all of your thoughts about all of these topics. Thanks again for listening.